The movie opens with an unknown character sitting in a child's room. A voiceover talks about the dead and how people want their stories told. Later, in a library, a librarian is observed stacking books. A man named Bennett enters. In order to collect a loan, Bennett is pursuing this librarian with the help of another man. But the librarian doesn't have the money to settle his debt. Instead, he tells Bennett about a book that is worth millions of dollars. He informs Bennett about the location of the book, but Bennett still kills the man. Bennett then leaves the library and tells his accomplice about the book called Book of Blood. They both pursue the location of the book. Meanwhile, the dead librarian is seen smiling, indicating that it was a trap for Bennett to send him to some mysterious dark place. The movie shifts to a young girl, Jenna, who is discussing a recent situation with her mother. It turns out that Jenna has stopped taking the medication prescribed by her doctor. She is suffering from depression due to some past incidents at her school. During a meal with her parents, she gets extremely irritated by the sounds they make while chewing and slurping. Later, Jenna overhears a conversation about plans to send her to a rehabilitation center. When her parents fall asleep, she sneaks into their room and steals some money. She plans to take a bus to Los Angeles. While walking down the road, she sees a creepy man staring at her. So, she took the bus. On the bus, she is once again annoyed by the surrounding noises, so she puts on her headphones to escape them. Then she notices the creepy man get onto the bus. This triggers her precautionary senses, and she gets off the bus. After making a stop in a small town, Jenna visits an internet cafe to find a bed and breakfast for the night. The chosen B&B is run by a kind, elderly couple, Ellie and Sam. There, she also meets another guest, Gavin. In her room, she hears some strange noises. She sees a cockroach crawling out of the wall. Just then, Ellie enters the room and invites Jenna for tea downstairs. During a conversation over tea, Jenna learns that Ellie worked as a nurse all her life, and Sam is a hobbyist handyman who has made various improvements to their house. Another cockroach emerges from the floorboards. Ellie grabbed the cockroach in a handkerchief and threw it away. Sam explains that they have a cockroach problem in the house, but they will fix it soon. While talking with Gavin, Jenna explains her neurological disorder, misophonia, which is an extreme sensitivity to sounds. This is why she always wears headphones. Gavin suggests they have coffee together and they exchange contact information. They both agreed to meet tomorrow for a coffee at a nearby cafe. That night, Jenna suffers from sleep paralysis. She has a nightmare. First, she sees her mother drinking wine. Then she sees Gavin trying to have intercourse with her, and then she sees the elderly couple planning something sinister by taking her measurements. Just then, hundreds of cockroaches crawl out of her mouth. However, as morning arrives, Jenna wakes up, free from her sleep paralysis. The next day, Jenna goes to meet Gavin at a cafe, but he doesn't show up. Instead, she sees the creepy man appear. Feeling scared, she decides to take off from the cafe. She runs out of the cafe through the back door. She finds her way back to her BB. She confides in Ellie that she was supposed to meet Gavin, but he didn't turn up. Ellie notices Jenna's distress and suggests she relax by working in the garden. The woman also notes that Jenna is much better with plants than with people and shares that she had twins, one of whom died at birth. In response, Jenna reveals that her mother had previously sent her to a farm, which turned out to be a psychiatric hospital. She also mentions being stalked by someone constantly, but she believes that the person who is stalking her doesn't even exist. Jenna decides to stay with the elderly couple for a few more days. At night, she hears some rustling. Moving aside a rug, she sees some fingers poking out. Frightened, she follows the wall and finds a hidden door. Inside, she discovers an emaciated but still alive body. She screamed in fear. Just then, she receives a text from Gavin. Jenna replies to Gavin to call the police as there has been a murder, but it turns out she has been texting Ellie all along. The living zombie reaches for Jenna. Ellie enters the room to inquire about Jenna, but Jenna knocks Ellie out. Jenna approaches each door inside the house, only to find them all locked. Desperate to escape, she examines the walls closely and discovers a secret passage. Without hesitation, she enters the dark room. As she enters the room, she is horrified to find several zombie-like people stored inside. Miraculously, she manages to escape and reaches the ground floor. Just as she tries to exit, she is confronted by Sam. Sam grabs her and Ellie, then knocks Jenna out by injecting her with a sedative. Jenna wakes up tied to a chair at the dinner table. A delighted Ellie explains that Jenna will no longer be troubled by fear and anxiety as they care for each guest with her special calming substances. She administers them through an IV. She explains how she started this practice back when she worked at the hospital and began filling her home with residents after her daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren were about to leave after a holiday. But this wasn't acceptable to Ellie, so when her son-in-law resisted the process of becoming plants, he had to be killed, and her daughter and grandchildren continued to exist beneath the floorboards. She sawed their eyes and lips and made them into zombies. Their human essence has spread throughout the house, and occasionally new seedlings appear. It was the same garden that Jenna was tending earlier that day. Gavin was their latest victim. The only problem is the cockroaches that feed on the people. To seal Jenna's eyes, Ellie gives her a catatonic syringe injection. However, just as she is ready to rip out her eyeballs, there comes a tap on the door. Ellie opens the door, and it turns out to be the same creepy man. The man shows a picture of her son with Jenna. He is looking for her as he wants to talk to her. Ellie lied that Jenna left their house a few hours back. The man counters by saying that he didn't see her leave. She invites him inside for tea. He gets inside and introduces himself as Balsam. Ellie made him sit in another room. She then excuses herself to get the tea. She enters the kitchen and signals Sam. She serves Balsam tea. Balsam explains that his son Tony was on a call with Jenna the night he died. He struggled with depression. Balsam just wants to talk to Jenna about Tony. Before he could say anything more, Sam hits him from behind and kills him. Meanwhile, the partially paralyzed Jenna tries to escape. She managed to crawl her way out through a window. She runs towards the shed to hide. There, she saw a mutilated man's half-body lying on a table. Her only option is to hide in the back seat of Balsam's car. The elderly couple soon came there and loaded the Balsam's body into the car. Sam drives the car to a quarry, whereas Ellie follows him with her own car. Sam pushes the car off a cliff by putting the car in neutral gear with Jenna and the corpse inside. The car crashes, and Jenna is heard screaming. The next thing that appears is a grainy video of a nude man inside a tiny room. Abruptly, he starts having paranormal experiences, and the lights go out. His frightful screams resonate through the shadows. Bloodied lettering covers the walls when the lights come back on, suggesting that he came across something sinister. Mary, a psychic researcher, views the video but doesn't give it much thought, shrugging it off as phony. Later on, Miles is shown. He is the only child of Mary and has cancer. Mary arrives at the hospital to meet him and discovers her ex-husband waiting outside. Mary angrily refuses to let this man visit their son because he left the family a long time ago. She then leaves to enter the hospital room where her son was treated. Miles is nearing the end of his life. He only wants to spend all of his time with his mother. A few days pass by and Miles passed away. Despite her loss, Mary returns to her workplace. She discovers Simon, a man, waiting for her there. Simon says that a few days ago he was the one who emailed her the videotape. Not only that, but he's the same guy in the video who says he's the messenger of the dead. Mary tells him to go since she doesn't believe him. When Simon claims Miles sent him, she agrees to hear him out. After a few weeks, the scene shifts to reveal that Mary and Simon had started dating. They have established a foundation where distinguished scholars from throughout the globe are invited to observe the communication of the dead. After that, we are led to a flashback. Simon goes naked into an empty room in one of their previous trials. Mary gives Simon a thorough examination to make sure he isn't hiding anything, while the guests observe from outside. She closes the door behind her and leaves the room after finishing the examination. He prepares to make touch with the dead. Simon warns them that things could get gory in this experiment. The lights abruptly go out, and his frantic shouts become audible. When the lights return, Simon is on the floor having a seizure, and the walls are covered in blood writings. Mary runs to Simon to save him. There, she notices something. Miles appears to have sent one of the texts, informing her that he is not sleeping. When Mary sees this, she is astonished and thinks Miles is really sending the message. She becomes more intrigued by Simon as a result of this incident, and starts to get to know him better. Later, she takes Simon to her home. He rushes directly to Miles's room and reports that the boy is there. Simon offers an unclear explanation to Mary, who is confused as to why her kid would speak to a stranger instead of her. They carry out further tests as the days go by. Every time Mary is with Simon, she feels as though she is becoming closer to her son. But one day, she accidentally witnesses Simon sharing a bed with an unknown girl. Simon, who is drunk, unintentionally reveals that he is a fraud who fooled her. He learned about Miles through her ex-husband and is not a messenger of the dead. He rigged the room in order to carry out the experiment. Simon hired a maintenance worker to briefly turn off the electricity. He actually used a chemical to write the notes the night before. The chemical is invisible until it comes into contact with an activation agent. Additionally, 1 hour prior to the performance, he gave himself a penicillin microdose by injection to make the seizures seem believable. After hearing everything, Mary walks to her son's room in a state of shock. There, when she gives his favorite toy a hug, an unseen power appears and writes, "Bring him to us," on the adjacent board. The next morning, Simon sobered up and came to Mary to tell her that he was going to leave and to apologize for his faults. She asks him to carry out the act nonetheless, stating that an enormous amount of money is at risk. Despite his shock, Simon agrees. Afterwards, the movie jumps to the present time, where Mary is meeting with an investor group. She announces that Simon will perform a live display of his powers. Simon, caught off guard, asks what she's doing, as he isn't prepared for the act. Mary insists he just plays along. Following that, she takes him to Miles's room, where she strips him naked and locks the door. She informs the investors that the door must stay locked no matter what. Just then, Simon sees a nearby chair moving. The ghost of Miles appears suddenly on that chair. More ghostly spirits showed up, and they all began attacking him. Simon screams in pain to spare his life, but Mary doesn't interfere. The spirits carved hundreds of bloody messages on his skin. Suddenly, the electricity of the whole town goes out. When Mary opens the room, she sees half-dead Simon covered with hundreds of messages carved on his skin. He was covered in blood. The movie shifts back to Bennett and his accomplice Steve, who were in search of the book. On their way to Ravenmoor, where they are looking for the Book of Blood, they almost run over a female, who happens to be Jenna. Steve informs Bennett that Ravenmoor is a haunted place and that no one dares enter. Bennett, though, is so focused on the money that he pushes Steve to drive without objecting. They both arrive at their destination, but strange things begin to happen as soon as they set foot in Ravenmoor. Their car battery unexpectedly dies, leaving them stranded. When Bennett leaves to investigate the issue, Steve witnesses his mother's ghost. He silently follows the spirit to a church in the area. Fearing about his friend, Bennett pursues him and soon discovers him inside the church. Steve was sitting on his knees. Bennett believed that he was in prayer, but as he moves closer, he realizes that Steve is gripping a gun to his throat. Steve was possessed by some spirits and shot himself. Frightened, Bennett runs out of the church and makes his way through the dimly lit streets to Mary's home. Everything has a layer of dust on it, giving the impression that no one has lived there in a while. Bennett looks around for a while until he hears laughter echoing above. He went upstairs, following the noises. He enters Miles's room and finds Simon and Mary. Mary is now old. Bennett puts his gun at Mary and demands the Book of Blood. She responds that Simon is the book, and his entire body is imprinted with stories written by the dead. Bennett is not the first person to come looking for the book, and he most likely won't be the last. Just then, Bennett witnesses his name being carved on Simon's body. Suddenly, a swarm of untamed rats attacks him. Bennett escapes the house and uses his knife to kill the rats that have crawled under his shirt. But rather than murdering the rats, he mistakenly stabs himself multiple times. Bennett is bleeding terribly now. He stumbles through the streets until he gets to Ellie and Sam's house. Sam was handling Gavin's body. Bennett is shocked and confused, unable to process what he is seeing. Ellie strikes him fatally from behind before he has a chance to respond, and Ellie kills him with a cruel smile. The movie then shifts back to Jenna, where she is surprisingly resilient and survives the fall. She was being treated at the hospital. The police informed her parents that they found her in the car that crashed. Inside the car was the body of Tony's father, Balsman. Jenna's mother informs the police that Jenna and Tony were in a relationship before he died. After a few days, Jenna is dispatched and her parents take her back home. But she felt depressed. She begins thinking back on her time with her ex-boyfriend. After that, a flashback of Jenna's last conversation with Tony is revealed. They are both mentally ill patients attempting to get better on their own. It is revealed in an unexpected turn of events that Tony was encouraged to commit suicide by Jenna. Jenna stated to Tony on the call that she was on top of a roof just like him. They had made a suicide pact and decided to end their lives together, but she couldn't do it. Although Tony was likewise afraid to carry out the act, she started calling him a coward. Hearing this, Tony decides to jump off the building and does so. Jenna sobs as she recalls her past acts and feels horrible about it. This caused her to have a mental breakdown. Now, plagued by guilt and unable to find peace in this world, she decides to return to Ellie and Sam and willingly agrees to become part of their garden. Ellie hugs her, and they both perform the experiment on her. They sealed her eyes and lips and placed her inside the floor in a chamber. Jenna is seen smiling as she gets rid of the noises and can finally find peace.